As we begin, for those of you who were just in the last session, it is very important that we take a moment to formally acknowledge that while we are gathering virtually this morning, Royal Roads University is situated on the unceded lands of the Swepsum and Lekwungen ancestors and families. I wanted to express gratitude that we can gather today as we live, work, and learn on these lands where the past, present, and future of Indigenous and non-Indigenous students, faculty, staff, and community can come together. I'm very pleased to welcome you this morning to this conference session, Ethics in Learning Design, an Instructional Designer's Conscience. This session features Lauren Halcomb-Smith and Ken Jeffrey. Lauren is an instructional designer at Royal Road University's Center for Teaching and Educational Technologies, or CTET, and Ken is the Associate Director of CTET. Together, Lauren and Ken bring decades of experience in higher education teaching, instructional design, and faculty support. They have co-authored several works about teaching and learning in the online environment, and are particularly interested in the intersection between instructional design and critical pedagogy. They are both strong supporters of active constructivist learning and believe that we are best able to learn through relationship building and collaboration. Today's interactive session will be 45 minutes in length, and there are group activities planned. I'll be monitoring the chat during the session, so feel free to ask questions as needed that you have for Lauren and Ken. And with that, let's get started. Over to you, Lauren and Ken.
Thank you so much, Ali, for that really generous welcome. We really appreciate it. And thank you all so much for being here. I'm Lauren, and there's Ken next to me on my screen. He might not be next to me on your screen. We have prepared some slides, a visual guide for our session, so I'm going to share those now. And there they are, and they're on my split screen, so I'm going to be looking at this side, even though I'm still very much with you here. So there's our title, as Ali said, and I wanted to thank Ali again so much for the traditional land acknowledgement, which we really appreciate. And here we are. Here's a little graphic introduction to me and Ken. So before we begin, we do want to do a little bit of self-location. So as I said, I'm Lauren, and my background is Polish on my mother's side and from Lutruwita, which is the Indigenous name for Tasmania, Australia, on my dad's side. My family name is Halcomb-Smith, which is a chosen family name, a blend of my husband's maternal family name and my paternal family name. I'm grateful to be joining you today from my home, where I'm a guest on the lands of the Swepsum or Lekwungen First Nation, in an area that I have learned has traditionally been used for fishing and processing silver salmon. I'm also known as Mama to a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I took and shared this picture with you. It's from the other day when I was picking my kids up from daycare, and the reason I take the picture is because I'm so proud of myself for the Herculean effort that it takes to wrangle and bundle 2 very small children onto a bike in the wintertime. And finally, as Ali said in her kind introduction, I am an instructional designer in CTET, which is the Center for Teaching and Educational Technologies at Royal Roads. And that role means I collaborate with instructors to design courses that marry the subject matter and best practices in education. I'm going to hand it over to Ken now so he can introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. So my name's Ken. I'm also a grateful guest on these lands. I'm the descendant of settlers from Great Britain, and my family tree branches all the way from Scotland down to Cornwall. So I'm currently connecting to you from the Royal Roads campus, which, as Ali mentioned, is located on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples. I moved over from Vancouver several years ago, and I love it here. in Vancouver, the lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. I'm continually thankful to be able to live here on the West Coast. I am the acting associate director for CTET, as was introduced. And a fun fact that doesn't always make it onto my formal educational CV is that prior to my years of work in higher education and instructional design and polytechnical education, I actually have a rich background in the graphic arts with typography and graphic design in my background. So I have really enjoyed the journey that brought me to this place and to today. I'm pleased to see everyone here. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. At this time, we'd love to invite folks to share a few words of their own self-location in the chat, whether that's your family background, your geographic or cultural background, your role in organization. We have a very large group with us today, so unfortunately we won't be able to hear from everyone verbally, but we do want to extend, the hand of welcome and the hand of community building for the sake of this session. So please feel free to do that in the chat as we just keep moving forward. I have a couple of housekeeping matters to say. So as I'm sure it's already been mentioned over the course of today's sessions, this session is being recorded. If you would prefer for your image or your voice not to be captured, that's totally fine. You are more than welcome to leave your camera and your microphone off and participate in the chat with all of the activities. To that point, Ken and I will not necessarily be monitoring the chat during this session. Ali did say that she's going to monitor lightly. We'll revisit the chat or visit the chat in the discussion activity, which is further towards the end of this session. You're welcome to leave your cameras on if you like. It does help create, a little bit of a sense that we're all here in the room together. But if you don't want to, that's okay. And but please do keep your microphones turned off to avoid audio interference. We actually are going to start with a little activity now. We're going to invite you to take over our slides for a second, our slide. Before I do, I just want to give you a little tech lesson here. We're going to ask you to annotate on the slides. And the way that you do that is at the top of your screen, you should see something that says View Options with a drop-down menu with an option to annotate. So I'm going to invite you to annotate the next slide so we can see how everyone's doing. Little temperature check. So please feel free to use the annotation tool and tell us how you're doing. How's your day going? Are you feeling warm or cold? And how are your energy levels today? Oh, this is great. I love this because I already feel more connected to you all through just this very simple getting a sense of how you're doing. So thank you. Thank you very much for that. Oh, and I love the rebels in the room who are typing on the screen. So nice. And I love seeing all your names pop up. Thank you for that, everyone. Really great to get a sense of where everyone's at and how everyone's feeling today. I'm gonna move on now. And I'm gonna try and erase all the annotations. I don't know if I can. Clear, there we go. Okay, so just to give you a little overview of the session for today, it's broken up into three pretty simple parts. We're going to talk about some theory for a little while. Hopefully it's not too boring. The first part is our sort of theoretical positionality. And then we're going to move into an activity where you're all going to go off into breakout rooms and discuss some ethical dilemmas that we have faced in our role as instructional designers. And then we are going to try and debrief a little bit. So before we do that, I've always gotten a lot of energy as a teacher from seeing the body language of my learners, the nods, the smiles, the looks of confusion. And so I really encourage you to use the button down here, the emojis button. Sorry, it's called the reactions button. In the words of the great Celine Dion in her 1992 song, please show some emotion so we can feel that sense of community and connectedness to you as we're working through, even though we are a large group. So yes, now that we know what we're here to share with you, and you kind of have a sense of ways that you can engage with us, we are curious to know how you're feeling confidence-wise about this topic, about the topic of ethical decisions or ethical decision-making for instructional designers. Use those annotation tools again. You have no idea what that could mean, or you feel pretty confident and knowledgeable about the topic. And anywhere on that scale is totally fine. And while you're doing that, I'll just sort of clarify for you what an instructional designer is. So an analogy that I like to use is an architect. So if you were a homeowner, you might get an architect to help you design your home, aligning with best practices in building design and stuff like that. But ultimately, it's your home and you're going to live in it. So that's kind of the same for an instructional designer or a learning designer. We collaborate with instructors to help them realize their vision of a course in higher ed through our understanding of best practices in education and their experiences in teaching and instruction, as well as their subject matter expertise. So we're a designer to support and collaborate with instructors. Great, such a wide spectrum of confidence levels, and that's great to see. Wherever you're at is totally okay. Hopefully by the end of the session, you'll have moved somewhere along that ladder, and hopefully it's towards the right and not the left. All right, so I'm going to move on now to tell you a little bit about the theory, our theoretical positionality that sort of informs how Ken and I have made decisions in ethical dilemmas throughout our career. So we are here to talk about ethical decisions and ethical dilemmas in instructional design. So I'm going to present a theoretical foundation for navigating and making sense of ethical dilemmas in instructional design. And before I share our theoretical framework, I'd like to establish a few foundational ideas. And I'm going to just clear those annotations, if I can. Yeah, okay. So first of all, I'll say that there's no code of ethics in instructional design. We don't have an equivalent of the Hippocratic Oath or the APA's Code of Ethics for research involving the study of humans. A scholar named Spector in 2005 did propose something called the Educratic Oath with a goal towards having kind of a code of ethics for instructional design, but it wasn't widely accepted, and nor has any other similar code for educators. And that's because educators have to do more than simply follow rules and policies. The learning environment is dynamic, it's complex, it's multidimensional. And this is my second point. Because of the dynamic, complex, and multifaceted nature of teaching and learning, many of the decisions that educators have to make can feel unsolvable. But, and to my third point, education is also inherently practical. We have to make decisions because those unsolvable situations have real life consequences for learners and for our colleagues. And so, my fourth point here, we are in a significant position of power when we make decisions that we make. Our decision may have the potential to perpetuate inequality or injustice, or on the flip side, empower and transform the lives of individuals. So in other words, by occupying a seat of decision-making, we occupy a position of power. And this is the point that I really wanted to arrive at, is that we can't separate ethical dilemmas, decision-making, and power. For us, for me and Ken, for Ken and I, these two are inextricable. And that's the crux of our theoretical stance, and why, as instructional designers, our consciences are deeply informed by the theory of critical pedagogy. So I'm going to talk about critical pedagogy just for a second here. Critical pedagogy is based in the fundamental principle that the world is a place that's rife with asymmetry in power and privilege. So that's kind of the foundational understanding. And that those inequities and asymmetries are reproduced in the context of schools. So in other words, schools shape and are shaped by the power and inequities inherent to our society. And so Ken and I have been using critical pedagogy to inform our thinking for a while now. My doctoral research was informed by critical pedagogy, and Ken has been practicing critical pedagogy in his own teaching for years by disrupting traditional models of teaching. And in 2020, we co-authored a chapter about how we were using critical pedagogy to explore the intersection between innovation and feedback in assessment. So it's a space that we're familiar with. And through this particular publication, we proposed a theoretical framework for being innovative as a critical pedagogue, and we called that model critical innovation. And so today we're going to use that model of critical innovation as sort of a way to guide decision-making in ethical dilemmas for instructional designers. And so I'm going to very briefly walk you through it, and then I'll be all done with the theory, and Ken's going to take over and lead you through the fun stuff. So there are sort of four parts of our framework of critical innovation. The first part is problematization, and that means questioning the status quo. It means challenging existing assumptions, asking ourselves and others, why are things the way they are? Who benefits and who suffers in a given situation, and who suffers and benefits for the outcome? And it's really important here that our problematization extends also to ourselves as the decision maker, going back to the idea that the point that I made before, that just by being called to make a decision, we're in a position of power. So we're problematizing. What next? We're not just following a specific code of conduct or specific rules. We are looking deeper to see where are those inequities, where are those asymmetries of power, where are the potential injustices. And now that we've done that, that's great, but it's not enough. We have a moral obligation to move past problematization and imagine alternative realities that have the potential to make existence better for the individuals involved and others. So that's the second part of our framework, is imagination. Now that we know who has power and we know who doesn't, we can imagine a better future. And we can ask ourselves, what change, what transformation do we want to see through this decision? And we're so fortunate at Royal Roads to have our learning, teaching, and research model as a guidebook for these imagined futures, as a guidebook for this practice of imagining. So our LTRM is an aspirational model that's based on the university's culture and values, and it provides direction and inspiration for this step in grappling with ethical dilemmas. But, and as I said before, our work is more than just discourse and debate. It's practical, we're doers, so we have to make a decision. So the next part of our framework is practice. So through imagination, we know what change we want to see. Imagination paves the way for practice by showing us the steps along the path. So practice as a baked-in part of this model also gives us permission to make a decision even when it feels unsolvable, because we must. In education, we must. And then finally, we've made our decision, but the process isn't done yet. And I almost feel like this last one is the most important one. Once we've made our decision, it's not enough to just pat ourselves on the back and say that it's a job well done. We move on to the final concept in our framework, which is reflexivity. And that calls for self-analysis and reflexivity on the part of the practitioner, and that would be the decision maker in this case. And this allows us, reflexivity guides us to reflect on our decisions after they've been made, to continually interrogate the choices that we've made, to ask ourselves who they affected, who they benefited, who suffered, what inequities may have been perpetuated or resolved in this outcome. So that's sort of the theory. We're problematizing, and we're imagining a better future. We're actually making the decision, and then we're reflecting on it. And so now I'm going to hand things over to Ken, and he's going to walk you through sort of following this process a little bit, if you can, and if you can't, that's okay too. And yeah, thanks for listening. I will mute myself now and hand things over to Ken.
Thanks, Lauren. Excellent. So after a little bit of that background, now what we're going to do is we're going to share 3 different ethical dilemmas and for everyone to discuss. So we're going to be using the breakout rooms in Zoom. We would as we prepare for that, we'd like to acknowledge that some ethical issues came up for Lauren and I when we were preparing these scenarios that we're going to share with you. On the one hand, we wanted to share authentic scenarios. But on the other hand, we also wanted to protect the privacy of students and colleagues. We're not trying to promote any one situation or person as, you know, bad or good. We've just decided that what we would do is fictionalize these scenarios a little bit. None of them is 100% accurate to any specific situation that we faced. They're more of a Frankenstein's monster combination of many situations that Lauren and I have experienced over a number of years. So it's a generalization of the situations that we have faced many times. So what's going to happen for the next part of this activity is that we're going to press the button. Everyone's going to be automatically placed into a breakout room. Each of the breakout rooms has a name that has a letter to it. So each breakout room will be telling you which scenario you're going to be discussing. We have 3 scenarios for you. Now, one moment. My screen just disappeared on me. Oh. There we go. Sorry about that, folks. I've got multiple monitors and Zoom keeps hopping around on me. Okay, so back to what I was saying. Each breakout room will have an indication via a letter as to which scenario. We've got 3 scenarios prepared for you. And you'll go into the breakout rooms, you'll discuss for 10 minutes, and then we'll bring you back and do some discussion and Q&A. And I just noticed a question in the chat. Yes, there will be a planned Q&A session after the after this discussion. And thanks, Ali. You can add questions to the chat as well. So one of the things I'm going to do before we go into breakout rooms, I'm going to post a link to the scenarios in the chat section of today's Zoom session. And I might also be able to upload. Okay, so I've given you 2 different options. One is a link to a Google Doc, which has the slides with the scenarios in it. And the other is a PDF file that you can choose to download. I don't know what kind of device you're working or connecting to us with right now, so you may find that one of those works better than the other. They're both the same information. I'm just sharing those 2 links separately so that you can access the scenarios. If for some reason, as you're going into your breakout group, you're still not sure which scenario you should be talking about, amongst those of you in your breakout group, you can just pick one. But generally speaking, if you choose the scenario that relates to the name of your breakout group, whether it's A, B, or C, then that will probably work best. Then we'll have a variety of scenarios for everybody. Okay, now Lauren is currently setting up the breakout rooms. Oh, Rhonda, you have a question. Or you've got your hand up in case you have a question.
Questions can go in the chat.
Yes, if you prefer, you can put your questions in the chat and then we'll address them when we come back from our session. That's a good idea. Thank you. Okay, I think we're all set to go. Lauren, are we good to go on the breakout rooms?
I've set up all the rooms. There's 20 rooms, so there should be between 5 and around 5 people in each room. I'm not sure how many people that might end up being just a few people. I will I'm gonna select so that everyone can return to the main session at any time. So if you're having big issues and asking the host for assistance through the graphic that's on the PowerPoint slide isn't working for you, you could come back, I suppose. And that also, if there's any if there's any conference organizers who end up in a breakout room and they don't feel like participating in the discussion, then they can come back to the main room too. I think Ken, we're also going to end up in a breakout room. So yeah, I'm going to start the room and I'm going to cross my fingers that this works. To be honest, this is the first time I've worked with such a large group in Zoom. So we're all learning together. And 1, 2, 3, go. Okay, so everyone's going to be back in 30 seconds. So I'll just close that and we're ready to go. It's going to be over to you, Ken.
Okay, excellent.
I think everyone is back now.
Excellent. Hi, everyone. Yep, there we go. Thanks for participating, everyone. I know I actually was able to drop in on one of the groups. I wasn't able to visit all of you in your breakout groups. There is likely maybe some terms in there that Lauren and I might be more familiar with as instructional designers, but I'm glad you all were able to just connect with each other and discuss some of these scenarios. In some of the scenarios, the question comes up as to, well, what is the ethical conundrum there? So we're going to talk about this for a few minutes now. In this section, we've got a lot of people here and perhaps not a huge amount of time. We're a large group, so we won't be able to hear from every breakout group, and I'm certainly not going to be putting anyone on the spot to have to share to all the group, but we are going to try and find some ways for everyone's voices to be heard a little bit. So I'm going to break down each scenario one by one, and I'm going to invite you for scenario one, for those of you that discussed, scenario A, in the chat, share one word, maybe two, that reflects the scenario for you, in try and distill it down just for fun. And I know, distill it down to one word. People are thinking, wow, what is Ken talking about? But give it a shot. See if you can distill it down to 1 or 2 words. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what really happened in that scenario, what were the issues, and maybe what we could have done differently. Now I've got, as I said before, I've got a bunch of screens open, so I may not be able to watch all of the chat, but okay, excellent. Some good words coming up there already. Perfect. So a little bit of background here that one of the issues that happens for instructional designers is we have all the access to the courses, the assignments, even the grades. We support faculty in delivering a course to students. So we have, from a technological standpoint, we have access to the course, we have access to the student list and the grade book, etc. We're the ones that help if there's something wrong in the grade book, but we also have access to a lot of private and sensitive data, which is part of our job. But in a situation like this, in scenario A neighbor who is also a close friend also becomes a student, and that could be in courses that instructional designer, or in our scenario, that is in the school or area that the instructional designer works with. So there's no automatic process at the school to identify when a friend enrolls. We do have some ways of dealing with family members, or even if a person themselves enrolls for a course, which we'll talk about later. But in this case, the instructional designer would have to use their better judgment. In these situations, it's often safest for all people involved, the instructional designer and their friend, if the instructional designer hands off the course to another instructional designer. We have in our department the ability, we have a number of instructional designers, IDs, and we, in this case, could do a bit of a trade. I'll look after one of your courses. Maybe you could look after this course because I've got some personal involvement in it. The other thing that we would practice in that case is that by involving the community, in other words, by speaking out as an instructional designer and saying, hey, there's a conflict here for me. By voicing that to my colleagues, I'm actually building in some accountability for myself and also to guard against any future issues that come up. Creating some boundaries, both with the friend, creating boundaries to stay away from any discussions about student works and grades. I definitely will want to keep a friendship if I were an instructional designer in this case, but we would steer away from those topics. Our learning management system actually logs all access. So even if I were to log into my friend's course, it would actually show up in the log. So I would just stay away from all of that. No matter how innocently it may be for me to be logging into one of those courses, I would definitely stay away from it. We would also set boundaries with the instructor to ensure that the instructional designer isn't inadvertently influencing how the instructor may interact with that student or even with their class. So in these situations, what we've sought after is conversations, transparency, and make sure everyone's okay with it. One of the things that we have a document at our university called the LTRM, and I won't do a deep dive into that, the Learning, Teaching, and Research Model. If some of you are familiar with our university, you've likely heard about it. And that document also would provide some guidance. One of the categories of the model, the LTRM, is caring, supportive, and community-based. We would want to navigate this situation carefully, but as part of a larger community. And that goes back to the point where I would ask for the support of my colleagues. Okay, scenario 2. I'll have to be careful of my time here. Scenario 2, again, those of you that discuss scenario 2, feel free to share one word that reflects the scenario. This one's about academic freedom, and academic freedom is important. We definitely don't want to stifle the academic freedom of our instructors. Our instructors bring a huge world of experience, but there's also processes that allow for the courses to exist in a structured way. In other words, a student takes one course at Royal Roads University, and then when they log into the next course, they look pretty similar. So compromises are necessary and quite common. But this flip side, there's a duality there between the instructional designer allowing the instructor to have the ability to teach the course the way they see it, which is important, but also allowing for some structure. It can also leave both parties feeling a little bit unsatisfied that they're getting everything that they want, necessarily speaking. And for those of you that read that scenario, you may have read between the lines a bit and sensed that there's a bit of a dual nature to those roles. One of the things we advocate at Royal Roads is really student-centered learning. And one of the things I can just relate from my experience in dealing with these situations, and I've dealt with them at other schools as well before I even got to Royal Roads, is that if a class is going to be taught differently, maybe that's not a problem, but it's also an opportunity for us to explain to the students why that class may be different. Particularly with adult learners, and at Royal Roads, we're dealing with mid-career professionals, adult learners, who like to know what's going on. So yeah, maybe the course is a little bit different, but we would be able to explain that to the students. Okay, I'm doing all the talking and not watching the words go by in the chat. Yes, expectations, power dynamics, there's a lot going on there. One of the ethical challenge for me as an instructional designer also in this situation is that as instructional designers, we're also often, and so is the instructor, but in different ways, we're wanting there to be a good student experience. So that's, someone mentioned, advocate for students' interests. Okay, in my endeavoring to keep things going, I'm going to quickly move over to scenario 3. This is the one where an instructional designer takes a course in their own school. Again, for those of you that discussed scenario 3, as the others have done, please feel free to share a word or 2 or 3 as to how you perceived that. This is one that happens as well. Our school encourages us as instructional designers, or as all of the staff at the university, to educate ourselves. We're continually growing and educating ourselves. So sometimes we take courses in our own school. This means that sometimes our relationship with instructors as instructional designers gets flipped. Now, all of a sudden, we were the instructional designer. We're seen as a support to building good educational experiences, and all of a sudden now we're flipped and we're the student. It can be challenging. Again, communication is a big one, but in this case, it's a university sanctioned situation. The instructional designer, in this case, in our scenario, Sean, is still a representative of the university, even when they've moved over to being a student, particularly when the university is paying for that, for his fees. So we can't suspend our identity. We are those two, we fulfill those two roles. But what we can do, and what we have done in the past when we've encountered these situations, is try to act mindfully about what we're doing and how we're portraying ourselves and our thoughts, and sharing those two different roles that intersect. The traditional Western educational system is based around grading, so there's definitely a power dynamic there. Sean, the instructional designer, has to accept and agree to the fact that his instructor, who may have previously been a colleague, is going to be in the position of grading Sean's work, and that's a part of it. So got some good comments here. Priority becomes his role as a student. Yes. From a technical standpoint, we actually do have a system in place at Royal Roads where if me as an instructional designer takes a course, I actually am removed. Remember I was saying earlier, we have access to everything. Well, if I take a course at Royal Roads University, we do have the ability to actually turn off my access to those courses. So I end up, as one of our commenters, Sasha said, the priority then does become the role as a student. I can't access the grade book or change things in the course.
Quick 5-minute warning here, Ken.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so with the 5-minute warning, I think I better stop, and we should see if people have questions.
We did have one question. I think Lauren has it ready.
I do. I have it ready. So the question was, what, according to your expectations, will be the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the communication ethics of the future? And how, according to you, will communication ethics look in post-COVID age? So Ken, while you were debriefing the scenario activity, I was sort of mulling over this question. And I just want to clarify that we've come to this, we're very much visitors in this domain of communication ethics. We've sort of been invited to talk about ethics from an instructional design perspective. So I'm not sure I can speak to communication ethics per se, but I can say from our perspective as instructional designers, COVID-19 has definitely highlighted as well as exacerbated some of the inherent inequities in education, especially in online learning. For example, one of the things I remember thinking about really strongly was instructors, chatting with instructors about whether or not it's ethical to have students require that students have their cameras on for the duration of a class. You know, if we, on the surface level, it might seem like, yes, we need to be able to see that they're participating, but with the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of students, you know, may not have felt comfortable sharing their private homes with others. They may not have been in a space that was appropriate to share on camera, and they may also have been juggling caring for small children or elderly parents or sick family members. So this is an example of how the pandemic highlighted and may have exacerbated some inequalities in our classroom. And so I think looking forward, for instructional designers, I think it's made us even more aware and committed to the issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion in the online learning space. So we'll be bringing forward the lessons that we've learned through you know, designing courses and supporting instructors through a pandemic. We'll be bringing those forward into the future, all the more committed to ensuring that everyone has an equal and equitable opportunity to learn and to have excellent learning experiences. I know that's not exactly the question that you asked, but I can't answer that question because I'm not a communication ethics person. I'm an instructional designer. So I hope that that's satisfactory. I'm going to check the chat now to see if we have any other questions. And that question was from Shmuel. I want to make sure that I'm saying your name right. I'll just spell it. It's S-H-M-U-E-L. I
believe that was our only question.
That's the only question so far, although I do see some acknowledgement about the camera issue. So I'm glad to see that that resonated.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we're about to bring things to a close here. So did just want to thank everyone for attending the session and for our lovely hosts. I learned a lot myself, so I really enjoyed, even though I'm volunteering here this morning, I really enjoyed this time and insight into how CTET does instructional design and the ethics involved with that. So thank you very much.
Thank you all for having us.
Thank you.
As I said, we're definitely guests here and we appreciate the invitation.
I've really enjoyed this. Thank you.